Tom Howe here with Dr. Bob Utley. Thank you for joining us and being part of these events.
I enjoy.
We're going to talk about a list of topics, but we'd like to start with kind of something that happened to me when I was at ETBU as a student. I walked up and I had a couple of questions, and I said, Dr. Bob, who's Melchizedek, and what does that mean for me today? And you had some tapes. Do you remember those cassette tapes? And you gave me one, on 2 or 3 other topics. And I listened to it, and it was my introduction into that, and it stayed with me all this time. So we won't talk about Melchizedek, maybe in particular, but more in general. What does he or others in the Old Testament mean for us as Christians, and how we understand Christ and Christology and Christophanies and stuff like that?
Let me start by the way you mentioned that you asked me a question in college. You know, Tom, what I found is that stuff that I have cried over, prayed over, read for decades, a student will ask me, and I'll try, because I'm a teacher, in 5 minutes to summarize it, right? And then they'll go, oh yeah, it's real interesting. See, there's a price to be paid for some of this, right? And you want to give it away, but really it's the struggle of some of these truths that are in your life that finally you're able to come to a place you can live with, though it may not be totally accurate because we're still fallen. I'd like to do a little preliminary thing about this. I get a little nervous in trying to read too much New Testament stuff back in the Old, because my basic hermeneutical principle is that you must go to the intent of the original inspired author and what would the hearers have understood, and that becomes the focus of a hermeneutical principle. So I think some of these things are not clear until history and further revelation made them a Christology, okay? But let's take Melchizedek. Now, we could take Isaac. A lot of people use Isaac, but I really think we're reading too much. There's nothing in the Hebrew text that says this is a messianic context. We just see some foreshadowings later in the life of Jesus that we see this sacrificial aspect. And I personally think the same thing is true of Melchizedek. I have struggled with that. Is he a pre-Christ figure? I have come to believe when you compare Genesis 14 with the only other place it's mentioned is Hebrews 7, that the reason that he is picked is because he was both a king and a priest, and Abraham gave him a tithe and bowed down to him, which made him in that culture superior. And I think we're picking up on Jesus being a priest king. Now, you and I mentioned before we were here about how that same kind of mixture of priest and king is found in Zechariah with Zerubbabel and Joshua, the two olive trees dripping in the menorah. It looks like to me that theologically what we're doing is there are 3 Old Testament anointed offices, and Jesus fulfills all 3 of them. And I think John Calvin's favorite chapter was Hebrews 1. And when he wrote his book on Christology, he took the 3 anointed offices that's there in Hebrews 1, 1 and 2. So we don't have the idea here of all 3, but we do have the priest king. So somehow, did you know that rabbinical Judaism expected 2 messiahs because of these texts? One, of course, from Judah and one from Levi, which now we know they're one person. So Jesus is, of course, the superior high priest to even Aaron. But I think that's what's happening here. And I was going to mention while we're on this, I think there are some other Christologies that I would see clearer than Melchizedek. One of them would be the angel of the Lord, angel of Yahweh. Particularly in Exodus 3, I think it's in verse 2 where it says the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the burning bush. Then in verse 4 it says, and Yahweh spoke to him out of the bush. So here we have the angel of the Lord is a pre-incarnate Jesus. But the problem for exegetes is that there are other places where the same phrase, the angel of the Lord, is used just for a common angel. So context has to determine if it's a Christological kind of thing or just an angel thing. And I was thinking of the captain in Joshua, that he met before the battle, who is another obvious prefiguring of Christ, though it's not stated that way. But he talks for God, and he's an army captain. So these are kind of things, I think the Old Testament is pointing toward some aspects of Jesus, but we don't really see that until we get to the New Testament.
We can make a list of them. We think about Boaz in the story of Ruth, the kinsman redeemer.
Yeah.
You mentioned Isaac and the sacrifice that was going to be made. And of course, God intervened with the story there. And there are other ones that we see. And so how careful do we need to be as we think about those of stamping our beliefs back into that old ancient Hebraic text?
That's the key. We got to be careful.
Or ignoring it altogether, saying that it's not relevant to me, which I hear that sometimes in preaching as well, that they just focus so New Testament that they don't pull out those.
Well, they must not have read Jesus' words in Matthew 5:17 through 19, where, he says, if you ignore these, you're least in the kingdom, right? Not a jot or a tittle. I think what's happened to us is there is obviously a major disjunction between the old and the new, and an obvious connection. It is rejected as a way of salvation in the New Testament, but Paul quotes it over and over as guidelines for how believers ought to live their lives. So, not the cultic part of it, though I think some Seventh-day Adventists and all have tried to pull that back in to be pleasing to God. But I think that's passed away. I think Hebrews affirms that. I think Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council, affirms that we don't have to keep those Old Testament days. But as far as the Ten Commandments, this becomes a priority guideline for God and a lifestyle priority because you know God. And so I think we're still under that encouragement. But I don't want to get too picky. I know you're a denominational person, so if there's any heat here, I'll take it, right? I'm really bothered by how some groups try to interpret the New Testament through the lens of the Old, which makes the New Testament primarily about Israel, about prophecies for the land. But I think because Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God, we've got to allow him to reinterpret the limited nationalism of the Old Testament into a universal offer. And I think what he does is that he takes what was for Israel, like just take Jerusalem. Now the new covenant, New Jerusalem is heaven. It's not a city in Palestine. So, and when Paul quotes Hosea, which was directly written to Jews, he makes it refer to Gentiles. And even the title of a kingdom of priests out of Exodus 19, 2 Peter and Revelation apply it to the church. So I really am screaming the New Testament is not about Israel. The New Testament is about Jesus.
Which opens the can of worms of covenantal theology and
versus
dispensational theology and how, or some blend thereof that I'm hearing these days a little bit, if that's possible. I want to go back to you referenced the text in Zechariah, and when I'm turning there, we also, thinking about Elijah and Elisha, we talked briefly about that also, about how you have Christ in the two of them. And I love Elijah, and it seems like we fall in love with Elijah, but really Elisha is the powerhouse prophet of the two. And he just doesn't get the credit. Elijah was afraid of Jezebel and has personal issues. Elisha just had a who gives a crud attitude, and he's just going to do what he's going to do with the Lord.
He was a bear trainer.
He called the bears on those 42 boys who kind of criticized him. Zechariah chapter 6, reading just a couple of verses starting in verse 9. The word of the Lord came to me, take silver and gold, and from the exiles, Hildai, Tobijah, and Jediah, and have them that arrive from Babylon, go the same day to the house of Josiah, son of Zephaniah. Take the silver and gold and make a crown, and set it on the head of Joshua, son of Jehozadak. Tell him, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Here is the man whose name is the branch, and he will branch out from this place and build the temple of the Lord. It is he who will build the temple of the Lord, and he will be clothed with majesty and sit on his throne, and he will be the priest on his throne, and there will be harmony between the two. And of course, you mentioned earlier the three roles, just to name them, is prophet, priest, and king. And two of those are referenced there. One I mentioned and the other one alluded to. And then, of course, it talks about Jesus, back to what you were saying a minute ago, of the Old Testament moving to the New Testament, moving from being Israel-centric to being Christ. It says he's adopting this imagery that he's going to be the rebuilt temple even.
Yeah. I'm really uncomfortable about a rebuilt temple because Hebrews is a one kind of sacrifice, and that's gone. So
right.
I don't think there will be a rebuilt temple.
Physical rebuilt temple.
Yeah, won't be there because Jesus is the new temple, and believers, because of that, are temples. The good example here, and Tom, I love you, but I want to bite you a bit, okay? I've got to go back because of my hermeneutical focus. I've got to say to myself, did the original author Did he understand this? And did the original Jews see in that what you're seeing? So I would say what we're doing today is, because we know the New Testament, we're able to say, now, they may not have fully understood this, just like the end of Daniel, but here's what the implication of the New Testament is. So I think it's a fair application based on the New Testament, but I don't think it's fair Hebrew exegesis based on this text alone. But there are obviously allusions to the branch, and this has been so cool to me. I know you know this, but I'm showing off, really. You know, Jesus of Nazareth, the word for branch is Nazar. And sometimes it says not Jesus of Nazareth, but it uses a form of that word. It really may be not a geographical location, but the branch, Jesus the branch, instead of the city. Because Nazareth is almost an unknown city. Only one Hebrew family lived there, right? And it's really strange. But Jesus the Nazarene may be a reference to this branch.
Which, of course, we see the branch mentioned in Jeremiah and Isaiah and others as allusion to the coming
stump
Messiah.
that was cut off and the shoot come out.
And the branch of Jesse, the branch of David,
right.
Which, of course, is Jesus. So.
Right. There's a lot of figures here, aren't there? And the fun thing of studying the Bible is that you just always see more and more. I just am fearful that we've got to be careful we don't read our theology, our denomination, or our personal experience into it, because the tendency is there to do it. We see it, you go so excited about it. We just got to go the second mile to check and make sure, could the original hearers have understood this? Or is this a multiple fulfillment prophecy? Or do I understand this only when I see the history of the New Testament?